What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse, and I don't know that there is a more important day for mock drafting, maybe for the entire year. We are hours outside of the finish of the NFL draft. Players finally have teams, and we are back into the rookie mock draft world. It is going to be a very fun show. With me, as always, my co-host, co-pilot, Austin Amandolia, who is recovering from a Taylor Swift concert. Austin, other than tired, how are you feeling today?
I'm doing great. I was going to say, I feel like Josh typically does on these shows where he's like, oh, I just woke up and I'm like, dude, I've been up since 7. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm ready to go. But not so much today. I was up late last night, but it was a great time and I'm happy to be here today. And, now we get into hot take season where people are like, oh, this landing spot is so good. It just launches this player into a first round pick.
I saw a really great tweet yesterday from, I think it was Mike Fiala, who said, I love all the tweets where players are talking about the guys, or fantasy analysts are talking about the guys they hyped up for weeks and how falling to the 6th round was the best thing that could have possibly happened to them. Like, it's so funny to me. Like, he's 100% right there. And that is a really good point that you bring up about, I'm used to doing shows with people who are super tired because Josh on our Monday show is always super tired. But over to our guest. He was with us last year, Emerson Beery. Welcome to the show. If you guys are not familiar with Emerson, he is a host with the Gambling Podcast, SGPN, and Fantasy Face Off, and he is a writer with Roto Underworld and TWSN. Emerson, introduce yourself, tell people where they can find your work, all that kind of fun stuff.
As he said, my name's Emerson. I'm super happy to be here today. On these Mondays, I'm always not very fresh on these Mondays as well, as I'm a bartender. As many people know, I do a lot of the Cocktail Hour Fantasy Football podcast. That's where you can find a lot of my stuff. And I give bartending tips there. Well, not bartending tips. I give restaurant tips for people who come into the restaurant. You know what I mean? Okay. There's a lot of restaurant challenged people in America right now. And I lead off my shows with some fun little restaurant tips and things like that. You can find me there, the SGPN Fantasy Football Podcast. Just started over at Player Profiler, so super excited about that. Roto Underworld, so that's super awesome. Matt Kelly's one of my heroes, so I always super excited to start there. And I've been at TWSN for about 6 months now too.
Yeah, I have been just living off of Player Profiler for the last 48 hours as I get my depth charts and projections and everything ready to see player comps. So I love the work they're doing over there. I love the work you guys are doing over there. So great to have you. As I mentioned before, folks, this is going to be another rookie mock. That has kind of been the flavor of the week for the last few weeks. We are going to run a Superflex rookie mock. I put 12 teams. I put 5 rounds. We'll talk about why I do so many rounds later. It used to be that I was just a psycho, but Austin actually brought some method to my madness. So we'll talk about that here in just a few moments. I'm certain it is going to be Bijan Robinson, number 1. Our buddy Zach is the first pick of the draft. I'm going to go ahead and start the draft here. And Zach is not in the room, so now we have to worry about, is it going to be an auto draft? But while we wait and see, he's in the chat room, though, so I'm certain he's going to make his pick, so never mind. Anyway, Emerson, the draft is over. We now have landing spots for all these rookies that we've spent the last 3 months analyzing. Coming out of the draft, who are the 2 or 3 players that you think landed in the absolute best spots? And if you can give me 2 or 3, I'll be impressed, because right now it doesn't seem like a lot of people are happy with 2 or 3 landing spots.
Oh, man. Yeah. This is the Hindenburg of the fantasy football drafts. You know what I mean? This was a disaster. Like, there's a couple, I'm in 20 plus dynasty leagues, and I'll be quick, but I was acquiring like a 2023 picks like they were going out of style in a couple of those leagues. And yeah, it just did not work out at all. So I'm a little bit disappointed about that. But Anthony Richardson is one player that I am very excited about his landing spot. The draft capital with the Indianapolis Colts, that Nick Sirianni offense, running read, RPOs with Jonathan Taylor. That is extremely exciting. And I'm also very excited about where Dalton Kincaid went as well. I like that landing spot with the Buffalo Bills quite a bit. And I think, we could see him emerging as the second option in that Buffalo Bills offense. I like that draft capital as well.
I don't want to interrupt, but you are on the clock. I got
you. Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate you. Ooh, let me pop over here.
I say you got 15 seconds if you can make time.
I got excited.
Austin, while he's getting into the draft, how are you feeling about some of these landing spots?
Yeah, 2 come to mind immediately for me. I mean, the first is just Bijan Robinson. Some of that's just for the vibes of it all, being an Atlanta Falcons fan.
I'm coming in quick.
Oh, also, if you tell me, I can put it in there for you.
I got it. That's who I would have picked anyway, so that's good.
Okay, perfect. And then just take yourself off of auto because it'll keep you on auto. So,
Yeah, and I think also just Bijan Robinson has the the landing spot is good for him as a fantasy asset because that offense was able to run the ball incredibly well with a 6th-round rookie last year. And so now dropping him in that incredible run offense, and then he will continue to be an incredible pass catcher. Like I imagine they will continue to do a little bit of positionless football, line him up in the slot, line him up outside. So I love that landing spot for him. The other landing spot I really love is Jordan Addison to the Vikings. I love his fit with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson in that offense. I think he is going to be an immediate weapon for them, being able to line up in the slot and give a really good wide receiver 2 option in that offense for Kirk Cousins to pass to. That's, I think, something Minnesota struggled with last year. It was kind of Jefferson or bust until Hawkinson came in, and now having both Addison and Hawkinson, I think, is going to be a big improvement for them.
I asked the question during our live stream of the first round, where are people putting Bijan? And universally, everybody said 1. And originally I was like, what a tremendous overreaction. I plugged Bijan into my model for redraft, and he came out as the RB2 behind McCaffrey, which is, I guess, not shocking. Emerson, how do you feel about Bijan in Atlanta? A team that I believe ran the ball most, or at the very least top 3 in the NFL last year.
Yeah, I really like the landing spot with the Atlanta Falcons. Arthur Smith may never pass the ball again, as it turns out. We know how Arthur Smith likes to run the ball. It's, he's going to get a ton of volume. We could see, we'll see how Desmond Ridder, traditional those mobile quarterbacks don't really pass to running backs very often, but we'll see how he develops in that area. But he's at least going to get a complete workhorse running back role. This is horrible. When I talk about another Hindenburg, though, I love it for Bijan. This is horrible for Drake London and Kyle Pitts, though.
Yeah, I saw that take a lot, that people are now very worried about the passing volume there. But I also saw people who just didn't like Bijan to the Falcons, which was shocking to me. And I'm talking, it was a Falcons fan that was railing against this. And I'm like, I love it. But again, we're all fantasy nerds. So I guess it works out better for us than it does for maybe some Falcons fans. But I think it's going to work out very well for everyone involved. On the flip side of the coin, Emerson, there had to have been some spots, with this being the Hindenburg, that you were not happy with. Let's talk about some players that you thought you were going to like going into the draft and coming out just did not work out the way it should have.
The obvious one is obviously Zach Charbonnet. That was going to Seattle Seahawks. Usually when we have a young running back going to a place with a solidified already guy in place, there's usually like an out somewhere. Like, oh man, this guy's a little bit older. We could see them moving on in 2024, or maybe this running back's a little bit more talented. There's a chance down the line he could beat him out. That isn't the case at all. Kenneth Walker is going to be in Seattle for the long term. Kenneth Walker is a more talented running back than Charbonnet. I don't see anything than Zach Charbonnet being the best handcuff running back in, maybe in football, but that's what you're drafting at the, in the early second round, late first round at this point. And, he's going to have some weeks where he's vaulted into the top 12 running backs. But when Kenneth Walker goes down with an injury anytime these next couple of years, so you're going to see, oh man, that's a premium handcuff right there. But it's just, he's not going to have that standalone value that we thought, at least going into the draft. And, another one, I'm not exactly, Will Levis, obviously the combination of draft capital, landing spot, the Tennessee Titans offense, Mike Vrabel, traditional, more of a running offense, just not a lot of exciting, not an offensive mind to develop Will Levis, really. Not a lot of strong offensive skill players around him either. So that was somewhere that I wasn't particularly excited about. And last, I'll finish up with Tank Bigsby. I was really hoping, I think he could have slid into the first round of this rookie draft if he would have went to a place where, hold on, I am on the clock. I'm just going to take a quick look here. I'm going to take Will Levis while I'm on the clock at the 2-4.
I was going to say, I don't think that's a bad pick. I was going to say, do I need to remind people in the chat that it's a Superflex draft?
Yeah, that was an easy one for me. At 2-4, that's a bargain. He still was a top 35 draft pick. But I was just going to take Bigsby really quick. It was just, I was hoping he was going to go to a place where he was going to be maybe at least have a key role, be on first and second down. But Travis Etienne is the more talented running back, so he's probably just going to spell Travis Etienne in places.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Going back to Charbonnet, we just did our first episode of Dynasty After Party last night, and I tuned in for a little bit to listen to the guys talk. And they brought up, clearly Pete Carroll wants to use multiple backs, and we've seen situations, Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, where he did use multiple backs. But Kenneth Walker, we would have kind of thought maybe outplayed the multiple back thing. what they did bring up is he's going to be very touchdown dependent, and you've kind of hit on that as well. And in redraft, touchdown dependent kind of works. In Dynasty, it's a little bit too scary because you're really, in the long run, just praying for an injury, if you will. Austin, other than the guys that he just mentioned, or do you want to reiterate any of the guys he just mentioned on bad landing spots?
Yeah, I've got 2 guys on bad landing spots. The first, I think, is Jackson Smith and Jigba. I do not like him in Seattle.
Wow.
Because he is going to basically be the number 3 in that offense for the first year, I think. Like, at this point, they are going to have Lockett, Metcalf, and JSN. I just don't see him having the immediate impact that we were hoping he would bring to an offense because of his landing spot. The second one is I actually don't like Dalton Kincaid's landing spot because we do this every year with the Buffalo Bills where we're like, oh, they're going to get a new wide receiver too.
And they're going to
no, they're not.
do something. Yeah.
They're gonna have a different one every week. And so I don't like just inserting Dalton Kincaid as that definite wide receiver 2 candidate. I want to see how this offense is going to go. They also added Damian Harris this offseason, and they added some more big bodies on the offensive line. And so they may be trying to have more ability to run the ball. So I'm not jumping on the Kincaid train right now. If he had gone somewhere else, I might have been okay with him. But Buffalo, they spread the ball so much, I never know what they're going to do.
I'm going to throw one at you guys that neither one of you mentioned. And it's a little shocking to me, Austin, because I happen to be able to see your rookie rankings before everybody else can, because we're getting ready to put those out on the website. Quentin Johnston to Los Angeles, where Austin, you have him pretty low in your rankings, especially compared to where I have him. And obviously there's time to adjust and fix that mistake. But anyway, you have him pretty low in your rankings. Did you just not like him before draft and the landing spot solidified that for you, Austin, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Quentin Johnston going into the draft, and the landing spot didn't move any needles for me. I think in general, I feel like he just doesn't have the route running ability he's going to need to be able to take a team to the next level and really be a viable fantasy starter out the gate. I think also like he's a yak monster. Like that's his main skill set, is catching the ball and doing something with it. And I'm not really sure that the Chargers offense is a great spot for players that are yak makers. Like if he had gone to San Francisco, that could have been interesting because that's what that whole offense is designed around, or the Miami Dolphins. But for the Chargers, I'm kind of like, okay, is he like the Mike Williams succession plan? Like that's sort of exciting, but like how long are we gonna have to wait on that? And I don't see him being that big of an impact player out the gate.
Yeah, I can see your points on JSN and Johnston being kind of buried on the depth chart. Emerson, what are your thoughts on Johnston and the Los Angeles Chargers fit? I think I like him from a dynasty aspect because he's tied to Justin Herbert, and I love Justin Herbert. So maybe that's why I have him too high up in my rankings. What are your thoughts, Emerson?
Yeah, I'm a little bit higher, I think, on consensus than Quentin Johnston too. We saw him get the draft capital to solidify his, I know there's been trepidation about his pro day 40, and I know people wish he ran in the 4.4s and things like that, but I see that speed on tape, the draft capital, the landing spot's ideal. I think he's right in that conversation with Jordan Addison for me. I've been going back and forth ranking them actually, just because I see, Jordan Addison, I think if you're looking for the safer 10 to 12 PPR points, I think that is Jordan Addison for you. I think Jordan Addison, we see he's this, I would say he's the better player right now. He has that far superior route running ability. But Quentin Johnston, the higher end outcomes for him, if he is very good, I believe, you're looking at a guy who could be a top 15, 20 wide receiver, where Jordan Addison tied to Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkins for a little while. I see him more fitting into this wide receiver 3. I like to look in 3-year windows for Dynasty, and I just see him as a player who more fits in that wide receiver 3 range for the foreseeable future.
Emerson, I don't know if another player had the bigger swing of worst landing spot to best landing spot during the draft, maybe in the history of the draft, than Jahmyr Gibbs. I think people were very, very upset about Jahmyr Gibbs' landing spot when he first landed. And then magically things got a lot better in day 2 when DeAndre Swift was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. So you have an offense that produced, I think, 22 running back touchdowns last season, but you have 2 brand new running backs in this Detroit Lions offense. What is your take on Gibbs? I guess speaking specifically to what we're looking at right now in Superflex, Is he the number 4 pick? Is he still stuck behind JSN because wide receivers tend to hold their value more? Or is he now overtaking JSN for that RB2 spot? For the second spot of position players.
I have Jahmyr Gibbs as my second player in the draft. He's at a more shallower position. Wide receiver is a little bit saturated in Dynasty, although if you're looking for the safer player in a rebuild, Jackson Smith-Njigba is good. Tyler Lockett could be on the move as early as next season, but Jahmyr Gibbs, we look at first round running backs over the last few years. They have a very good track record. Detroit Lions, Brad Holmes is a smart GM, even though I disagree with a lot of his decisions in this draft. So he was willing to take him at the 12 spot. So I think we saw it. If you're willing to take a running back at the 12 spot, you're going to use that running back. So I saw Swift likely on the move. Right when they took him at number 12, I saw Swift probably potentially on the move. So right when I saw that, he was my second player in one quarterback formats, outside of the quarterback.
Yeah.
So I love the landing spot. I think Jahmyr Gibbs, he's already probably teetering on that top 10 running back in Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues.
That's what I'm hearing from a lot of folks now. Austin, you brought up a lot of things before Jahmyr Gibbs was ever in the picture that you were thinking David Montgomery could possibly usurp a lot of the passing game work from DeAndre Swift. Are we thinking full flip now? I think DeAndre Swift was at 77 targets last year and not a lot of games. Do we think that's all falling to Gibbs? Do we think there's more of a split? How do you see it splitting in year one?
Yeah, I could honestly see it being more of an even split. I mean, you have two guys that are very versatile in the offense now. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see them run more 2 running back sets and have them both as receiving options on plays, have one pass blocking, the other one receiving, and kind of using them both as weapons. But they have a very similar skill set from my mind. And so I really feel like they'll probably be able to be a little bit interchangeable. I do suspect David Montgomery takes a little bit more of that, like between the tackles, particularly goal line work, and Jahmyr Gibbs leans more to be the prominent running back option in the passing game, but I could see them being more interchangeable.
I'm going to address an elephant in the room that caught me off guard right away, and I don't know if she didn't know it was Superflex, but Faith takes Jackson Smith-Njigba with the 2nd overall in what is a Superflex mock draft. And obviously, it's not always easy to tell it's a Superflex mock draft. She may not have even known. But looking at Jackson Smith-Njigba going to Emerson, I've been making this point for quite a while. When I originally got into Superflex Dynasty, I was always told it's quarterback no matter what. You got to get the quarterback. They're never cheaper than the draft. Well, last year, Breece Hall came in and it's like, well, it's quarterback except for Breece Hall. This year it's quarterback except for Bijan Robinson. Is there a team build where you are so set at quarterback that taking Jackson Smith-Njigba makes sense at 102, or it doesn't matter how good you are at quarterback, you're focused on the value and you need to take quarterback at 102?
I always think that the best dynasty building strategy is building your value, building your capital. I always would go with the best player available. You can always make a trade with that quarterback. For me, Jackson, it would take nearly not two Jackson Smith-Njigbas for Anthony Richardson if I was trading. And
defending herself.
She knew. Okay. All right. I see. That would not have been my choice. I would have had Jackson Smith-Njigba at the 6th spot for me. I would have taken the quarterbacks. I would have gone with Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of that. But Jackson Smith-Njigba, I do think you're going to see him be a very good player down the line. I just think it might not see that in 2023. But like I said, Tyler Lockett moving on. We'll see, if Geno Smith is that same quarterback we saw last year, there's a lot to like in this offense.
Yeah, Austin, I'm going to have you continue with that line of thinking because we've talked about this for weeks now because I joke that everything we do on the show is to help one of my dynasty teams specifically. And I'm in a situation where I'm probably going to be choosing between Jahmyr Gibbs and Jackson Smith-Njigba, and that got a little bit easier for me over the weekend. But my debate was I was stacked at wide receiver, thin at running back, and if Njigba landed in a better spot, it would have been very tempting to take him. But just along those same lines, are you drafting for value or are you drafting for team need, especially this early in the draft, Austin?
I think you have to go for value because, if you're taking Anthony Richardson at the 2 spot, some other team is going to want him at some point, most likely. Like if he pops the way we think he's going to, worst case scenario, you're able to trade him for more draft capital if you don't need the quarterback depth. So I tend to be best player on the board. And if I am trading for need, this is an opportunity where I would be trading back in my draft and acquiring future picks. So that's something we can't simulate here. But I wouldn't be drafting for need if you can't make trades. And so in this scenario, I'm always drafting for value. But that's obviously different when you're able to move around in the draft.
Yeah, and that's something we need to reach out to the people at Sleeper. They're always so nice about adding changes. And we've talked about being able to trade in these mock drafts because trading is so important. But Faith, just right on it. She hates trading, so she was never going to trade out of the 102. She got her guy. Faith, an enormous Ohio State fan. How could she not possibly take the best player coming out of Ohio State? Obviously, that's a joke. Faith's a big Georgia Bulldog fan. How Stetson Bennett wasn't the pick, I guess we'll never know. But anyway.
Or Darnell Washington. I was surprised you didn't take Darnell Washington.
There you go. We're going to keep going with this. I want to talk about something before I move on to ask you guys some questions. So I do these very long mock drafts, and to me, they've never really seemed long with 60 rookies being drafted, but I guess it is that unless you're a complete psycho, you may not even know 60 rookies. But something we've always liked to talk about on the show is priority waivers. And so in this 5th round, a lot of the guys you're going to see going in this 5th round are probably going to be available for you on your waiver wire. And you now know that people are interested. And before the end of the show, I'm going to have these guys talk about the people specifically who went in the 5th round to let them know if that is something that they should be looking to add in the waiver system right after their draft. I want to keep moving along with I had the question all teed up. Zay Flowers. So me and Austin were talking about this a little bit before the show. Zay Flowers ends up in Baltimore, and traditionally Baltimore Emerson has been not a great landing spot for wide receivers. However, new offensive coordinator this year, and there seems to be a promise of more passing volume for the Baltimore Ravens and Zay Flowers, and they were finally able to lock down Lamar Jackson. The pick of Zay Flowers feels a lot to me like Jahan Dotson. And I was in a mock yesterday where I had the 6th pick and Zay Flowers was the obvious, like, I should take Zay Flowers. And I went all the way down to my rankings and took Devin Ashane instead because I just am still weirded out by the Baltimore landing spot. What is your take on Zay Flowers and the Baltimore Ravens?
I love it for the Baltimore Ravens offense. I think this is going to add a dynamic playmaker. Zay Flowers was my pre-draft wide receiver too. I'm a big fan of his game. For a smaller wide receiver, he does all of the things well that you wouldn't expect from a smaller wide receiver. He's a threat downfield, makes it strong at the contested catch point. So I saw him as a guy who he could develop. What he was asked to do at Boston College was not typical what a small player does. So I thought he could develop in that short game, but I think, this is one of those disaster landing spots. I do, pairing with Lamar Jackson, somebody who's going to, one of the most run heavy offenses in the league. Lamar Jackson, not one of those upper echelon passers, playing with Odell Beckham Jr., Mark Andrews. I just see this as not an ideal landing spot. We saw the boom bust nature of Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman over these last couple of years. And I think that is going to be what you'll see from Zay Flowers as well. He'll have his big weeks, but because of those down weeks as well, he'll probably fit in wide receiver 3 range. And down in the line.
You have some more thoughts on Flowers, Austin?
Somewhat. I think he has potential to be more of that wide receiver 2 option within the Baltimore offense. I think the thing about projecting Baltimore's offense right now is they also have a new offensive coordinator this year. They've brought in Todd Monken, which is going to change what we've seen from the past several years. And I think that could benefit the pass catchers. Like, I don't think we're going to be seeing any ridiculous screens to Paul Ricard like 3 times in a game moving forward, which is going to open up some opportunities in the pass game elsewhere. So I'll be curious to see how the Ravens pan out this year. And so I'm fine with Zay Flowers. I also think, similar to what you were saying about Quentin Johnston being attached to, my brain.
Justin Herbert, you're good.
Justin Herbert. Zay Flowers being attached to Lamar Jackson is an incredible opportunity. And I think there are enough weapons in this offense that he could have moments where he really pops because there are going to be other weapons that people are looking to defend.
I have an early candidate for what is going to be my oops of the draft, so I'm kind of giving it away now, but I have to ask the question, Emerson. You were the one, I believe, who brought up Zach Charbonnet as the bad landing spot. Is it so bad Kendry Miller should be going before him at 111, or is that just not a great pick by AC Kemp at the 111?
I actually would. I think that's accurate. I would take Kendry Miller ahead of Zach.
Really?
Charbonnet.
Okay.
Where's the upside? I'm just shooting for an upside picker. Where is the upside in Zach Charbonnet anytime in the near future? You're going to have your weeks. You can start him, but Kendry Miller is a guy I really liked in the pre-draft process. One of the best pure rushers in college last year. great athlete. We didn't get to see that really in testing because he was recovering from an injury. But, I see he's one of the youngest running backs. Wasn't a strong pass catcher in college, but that's something I could see him developing. New Orleans, they could be moving on from Alvin Kamara as early as next season. I just see, like, once again, if we're going for the safer spot, if we're going for who's more likely to get you 10 PPR points, it's Charbonnet. I would agree with that. But if we're going for upside here, and that's what I like to do, especially at the end of this late first round here, I would go with Kendre Miller as well.
Austin, I'm going to have you continue in that train of thought. I don't remember your running back rankings off the top of my head, but is Charbonnet falling about 5? Would you have a Shane and Miller ahead of him?
Yeah, if Charbonnet was actually one note about how I'm drafting today. I'm just following my Superflex rankings to see how I like them because I just updated them this past weekend. What a wonder!
Thank you for bringing that because that's a great way. Like after you do rankings, jump into a mock draft and play by your rankings 100%. Great note there, Austin.
And this was actually a part where I did not like my rankings because I currently have Zay Flowers ranked 2 spots ahead of Zach Charbonnet. But when I got here, I wanted to draft Zach Charbonnet because he had fallen so far. So I'm going to be adjusting that after this draft. I don't like the pick of Kendre Miller over Zach Charbonnet because I'm still going for the talent at this point. Like any of these running backs outside of Bijan, they're in a committee starting out. And so the upside for all of them is limited. Kendre Miller, you're like drafting and holding for another year because New Orleans right now, they have Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams on the offense. Like he's either going to be in a 3-headed committee starting out, or he's not going to get snaps this year because Kamara and Williams can manage the load. And so I would rather take Charbonnet, who has a better opportunity to be in a 2-headed committee out the gate with Kenneth Walker than Kendre Miller. But, like at this point, there's also an element of like, trust your gut. If you like Kendre Miller more, like, I respect it. It just isn't where I would be going at that spot.
Emerson, I'm going to have you just reiterate a little bit more about Kendre Miller. One thing we didn't talk about is, for those that don't know, Alvin Kamara does have some legal woes hanging over his head. If Kamara were to miss time, be cut, can Miller step? I know you mentioned, not the most prolific pass catcher, but didn't really have the opportunity. Could he step in to an Alvin Kamara-like role while Jamal Williams is a bruiser if Kamara were not on the Saints?
I like I said, he doesn't have those kind of pass catching chops, but he's somebody, like I said, I'm shooting for an outlier outcome. He was drafted. He got that day 2 draft capital, and he went to a spot like we talked about. He went to a crowded backfield, but you see how it could work out for him. You see Alvin Kamara could get suspended. That they likely are probably moving on from him in 2024. So there's within, that 3-year dynasty window I'm talking about, you could see Kendre Miller as that starter in New Orleans. So, considering the talent, obviously, we're betting on a lot of outlier outcomes at this point, you know what I mean? But when we're just like Quentin Johnston, if he does succeed, we're talking about a guy who could be that consistent top 15, top 20 running back, as opposed to Charbonnet, who's probably waiting for Kenneth Walker to get it, for an injury or something like that, to be a consistent fantasy producer.
Our guy Joel Worth agrees with you. He just says Miller's the better player, and he's calling himself a notorious Charbonnet hater. So that kind of works out there. I'm actually going to look at Joel's team because something interesting happened. I was paying attention to the sleeper group chat. I had a little bit more diversity today where I was able to look at that. Joel took Rashee Rice with the 2-3, and then 8 picks later, AC Kemp takes Jayden Reed. Joel is a Packers fan, and Joel got called out for taking Rashee Rice in the sleeper chat. Austin, knowing Joel as a Packers fan, and basically what the guy said in the group chat was, you can't take Rashee Rice because of what happened to Sky Moore, and even mentioned Jayden Reed as the better pick, but Joel, the Packers fan, took Rashee Rice. So I guess what's your take on these second-round wide receivers, these 2 specifically, and are we a little shocked Joel went Kansas City? Joel's a Patrick Mahomes guy as well, but are we a little shocked Joel went Kansas City over Green Bay?
Yes, I am shocked about that. This was a pick that stuck out to me as well. And once again, Joel doing some spicy things that I wish you were here to account for. But yeah, I also probably would have taken Jayden Reed ahead of Rashee Rice. I have Jayden Reed ranked, as my 5th wide receiver option right now because I love the landing spot, first off. And also, he was one of those big Senior Bowl breakout stars who did really well, performed really well, and caught some attention there. I really like his speed off the line. He's got some good route running abilities. So I am a fan of having Jayden Reed ahead of Rashee Rice. And I agree. We've already referenced multiple times of like Quentin Johnston being attached to Justin Herbert and Zay Flowers being attached to Lamar Jackson. I think we do have to be careful to some extent, just assuming that a receiver attached to an elite wide receiver is going to be all the rage. I think that is borne out that that's not always the case. And so, I'm honestly having a hard time ranking Rashee Rice right now. And so I'm going to go back and watch the tape again and try and figure out where I want him. But I understand kind of the flack that Joel is getting on that pick.
Emerson, I'm going to have you continue with that. Joel defends himself that he's anticipating the crowd think on Rashee Rice going to Kansas City, meaning he thinks Rice is going to have more value for him after the draft. Is that accurate? But more importantly, the thing that really struck me about the comment in the draft itself was, should we be holding the sins of Sky Moore against Rashee Rice?
I'm a Kansas City Chief fan. I went through all the rough years with Matt Castle and Herm Edwards and everything, and I came out on the other side with Patrick Mahomes. So I do question our wide receiver judgment over these last few years. In the earlier rounds, Demarcus Robinson, McCole Hardman, Sky Moore. Reed is not somebody I'd be vaulting up my rankings, but he is somebody I'm sorry. Rice is not somebody I'm vaulting up my rankings, but he is somebody I actually would draft ahead of Jayden Reed. I saw that I had them in a similar tier. I preferred other talents like Marvin Mims and Josh Downs in my pre-draft process, but they did get the second round draft capital. These are two guys who, I'm not super excited about. Like I said, the wide receiver market is very saturated. Where do we see these guys fitting in? You look at the dynasty landscape, it's hard to put them even in the top 50 dynasty wide receivers. They're sliding into wide receiver 5 territory. And, like I said, it's just, we've seen what Kansas City's done. I don't think Jordan Love can support multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers. That would be my trepidations about Reed, and already questioning his upside. What's the best case scenario for this guy? So I just see him as more of a guy who, could get you to maybe 10 PPR points if things were to work out. I would just prefer Rice, just based on the outlier outcome that Patrick Mahomes finally develops a really good rapport with a wide receiver that we drafted in the earlier rounds. So that would be why I would just go with Rice. No other basic, like I said, I had them in a very similar tier as far as talent goes. So I am just chasing that landing spot and hoping that once, I've been burned so many times by this Kansas City Chiefs offense with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Cole Hardman, fantasy players have too. So I would just go with Rice, but barely.
I love it. Austin, it wouldn't be a club fantasy show if we didn't talk about Jalin Hyatt. Josh has put it in all of our contracts that we have to talk a little bit about Jalin Hyatt. I'm going to throw both Tennessee wide receivers at you. They went back-to-back in this draft at 212 and 3-1. And I think there are landing spot questions about both. Josh is pretty excited about Hyatt to the Giants. But I'm worried about the very crowded wide receiver room, though he is very different from the rest of those wide receivers. Tillman ends up in Cleveland, and unless Cleveland is going to make a drastic change, which they could. This is their first full year with Deshaun Watson. It's a pretty crowded wide receiver room as well. They drafted David Bell in the 3rd last year, Anthony Schwartz in the 4th or 5th 2 years ago. And these are guys that don't even rank in their top 5 anymore because they brought in Marquise Goodwin. They traded for Elijah Moore. So these were 2 wide receivers that people were very interested in their landing spots. And I don't know that they did many favors. I'm almost certain Hyatt went way later in this draft than he did when we originally mocked a Superflex. I can go back and look at that in a second. But let's just talk a little bit about these Tennessee wide receivers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think with Hyatt, part of the reason he's falling is not so much the landing spot, but just the draft capital and the NFL draft. The fact that he fell further than people anticipated. He was expected to be a 1st-round pick, and he didn't get picked until I think the 2nd round, third round. So so people were looking at that day 2 value and saying, okay, clearly NFL teams are not valuing him the same as we were going into the process. I actually do like the landing spot though, because the Giants, they need a good slot receiver, and Jalin Hyatt has a potential to win that role. Whereas Cedric Tillman, I don't like his landing spot because he's more of a traditional X outside receiver, and they kind of already have that in Cleveland. And I also, maybe they're going to shift how they do their offense this year, but I don't see them really moving away from this heavy run. I know they have Deshaun Watson there, and so there's more ability to have a prolific pass offense there. But I still think you have Nick Chubb, you have those big tight ends, that big offensive line. Like, I don't imagine them moving all of a sudden to be this 11 personnel team that's just spreading the ball around the field. So yeah, I don't love the landing spot for Tillman. And that's even though I had Tillman ahead of Hyatt going into the draft process.
Emerson, I'm going to have you continue on the Tennessee wide receivers. I just went and looked. Hyatt went 10 picks later. We did this draft 3 weeks ago before landing spots and before draft capital, and Hyatt went 10 picks later. So where he went, does it make a lot of sense? How do we feel about Tillman that early, being that he is kind of in a logjam in Cleveland?
Yeah, starting off with Tillman, it's just somebody. Yeah, it's hard to get excited about the landing spot. Although, once again, he's tied to Deshaun Watson, so you see where, if things don't work out with maybe Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, he could emerge in the offense. He's not someone who I saw with a ton of upside in this draft. Like I said, this is the wide. If you need 8 PPR wide receiver points, this is your draft. These are all just solid players we're talking about here, but just not significant fantasy contributors. If there's a player in your dynasty leagues that's a big fan of if they're a big fan of the talent of Hyatt, of Cedric Tillman, this would be a guy I'd definitely be willing to, if there's a positive camp report we see, and get a little juice going, somebody I'd be looking to cash out for a 2024 second round pick in a heartbeat, just to reset, get a, I think next year, we'll try it again with next year's class, because I think, there's going to be a lot of more hesitation just going all in on rookie classes now. I think people are there's a hard lesson for people here. We got this. I thought this was going to be like 2020, where, there was Justin Jefferson going at the end of the first, and, all this talent, you know what I mean? And that was far from the case. I remember Javonte Williams, there was a lot of guys you were getting at the late first that were extremely exciting. That is not the case this year. If you don't have a top 6 pick, but Jalin Hyatt, all New York has is slot receivers. It feels like, of course, Hyatt is is probably going to be the most talented, but man, it's hard to get excited about that either. In my opinion, it's just a big, grouping of marginally talented wide receivers. Wan'Dale Robinson is probably my favorite guy in that, although he'll probably take a little bit of time recovering from his ACL injury at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you look at these guys, it's just specifically about Hyatt is he's certainly the fastest guy probably on the team right now, but then you're worried about like who's going to play the slot where you have the Wan'Dale Robinson recovery. They re-signed Sterling Shepard. Them and Cleveland had very similar off seasons where they just kept bringing in players. And I understand a lot of them are only camp bodies, but it's still just very interesting to see how they're going to be handled. And that's one of the reasons, like after this draft, you have to pay a lot of attention to what happens with your players for the rest of the offseason. But I love the point you brought up about maybe it's time to trade these picks and reset for next year. Last year, people just shit talked the 2021 class so bad.
Look what happened.
Excuse me, the 2022 class. They said, but wait till 2023. Wait till 2023. And then now we're like doing the same thing to 2023, but wait till 2024. It's going to be way better. It's a super flex draft, so we would be remiss if we did not talk about the quarterbacks. You guys kind of already hit on Young, Richardson, Stroud. Are Levis and Hooker, Emerson, going where they should be? So Levis goes at the 16th pick of a Superflex draft, and Hendon Hooker goes at the 21st pick. Excuse me, 21st pick of the Superflex. Is that where these second-tier guys who are kind of trapped right now, though Levis might not be all that trapped, is that where they should be falling, even though this is Superflex, or should they be coming up closer to the back end of round 1, Emerson?
Will Levis should be at the back end of round 1. He'd fall to 110 for me, and I don't like ranking him there. I'm not aggressive on Will Levis. It's more about the players around him. We didn't get a lot of great landing spots on day 2. And yeah, like I said, it's Kendre Miller, Devon A-Chain. Give me the quarterback in a super flex league over those options. And yeah, I mean, Hendon Hooker though, yes, I think that's proper value. It's just, you look at round, it's Russell Wilson in round 3. History, it changes all the time, but it's Russell Wilson in round 3 for historical quarterbacks in the last 20 years. And that's pretty much it. It's a premium position in football. If they think there's a remote chance that you're going to be a starter, you're drafting the top 15, you know what I mean? You're a top 20 pick. So, falling to the 3rd round is a little bit disappointing. Jared Goff, going to have every opportunity to succeed. And in this great offense, and Hendon Hooker with 3rd round draft capital, they are completely fine having him just sit and never play if Jared Goff is good. With that draft capital, they're not going to feel pressured to put him in the game unless Jared Goff is struggling. They're not going to feel any pressure to move on to him either with that kind of draft capital. So that's just my trepidations on him and why, I could see where you'd probably put him in the third round even just because, it's just an outlier chance. He's not going to start this season. And then he's going to be 26 years old next season too.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Austin, keep talking about the quarterbacks, and I'm not going to have you guys talk about the late quarterbacks because they're going to kind of fall into that priority waiver thing because of how late they happen to fall in this draft. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but just keep going with Hendon Hooker and Will Levis.
Yeah, I think Will Levis is kind of, I think he's in about the right range where he went in this draft just because I'm not sure that he's going to get to start this year. And I think with him falling to the second round, there are a lot of questions about the draft capital and if teams really see him as an immediate game changer for teams. So I'm fine with him falling to the second round, particularly with some of the tight end talent in this draft. Like if you're a team that is struggling at tight end, I think it makes a lot of sense to prioritize the tight ends over Will Levis, particularly because if you're towards the end of the first round in a Superflex league, you probably have good quarterbacks. That's probably why your draft pick is so low. The one that really stuck out to me was CJ Stroud falling all the way to the 107.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was even an auto pick. So I'm honestly curious, like how far CJ Stroud would have fallen. I was kind of like starting to, get excited that I was going to be able to take him at the 109. I'm surprised that he fell that far. Like he was at the 102, 103 for most of the pre-draft process. And now he's down at the 107.
He was actually the first quarterback taken in this draft 4 weeks ago ahead of both the other guys. So.
And I guess there's concern about the landing spot, but I'm not worried about it with CJ Stroud. I think what Houston is doing is very different than what we've seen them do over the past several years. And I feel like they are doing everything they can to get their new quarterback as much help as possible. So I don't really see, I definitely would not be taking Quentin Johnston over him. Like that is bonkers to me. I think maybe you can make a case about Jahmyr Gibbs, but in a Superflex league, like I'm taking CJ Stroud if I'm early in the draft.
Yeah, Austin, you definitely have touched on what was going to be the oops of the draft was the Quentin Johnston pick. I was like, I have many candidates, but there's only one that really stands out. Guys, let's move on to the tight ends. You guys actually haven't talked much about tight ends, Austin. You just kind of referenced them a little bit. You mentioned you didn't like the landing spot for Dalton Kincaid. So Austin, I'm going to let you keep going since you just brought up the tight ends. We thought we'd see multiple first round guys. Instead, we saw a plethora of second round guys and the freak Darnell Washington falling all the way to the third round. Do we like kind of where they ended up in this draft versus landing spots? Are we expecting just another block class of tight end now?
So I think this is an interesting point to talk about why NFL teams decided to wait to draft certain positions and how it is different for each position. So I think people saw the tight ends fall to the second round and they thought, oh, so the teams don't like the tight end class. And I think that's not true. I think that is the opposite case. I think that teams were saying, oh, I could take Michael Mayer with the 25th pick, but I could also take Sam Laporta in the second round. So I'm going to wait and get Sam Laporta later and get a different elite player now. And so I think with the tight end class, there being so many day two picks was actually a sign that the NFL teams loved this tight end class and were willing to wait on better tight ends. With the receiving class, I think it was the opposite, where it was like, yeah, we're not really excited about these receivers. We're going to get a few guys in the first round, and then after that, it's going to kind of fall off a cliff. And so I think we shouldn't assume that just because there were a bunch of day two tight end picks that all of a sudden this tight end class isn't good. I think this tight end class is great. I would have wanted to see more tight ends going in the late second round, early third round, because I really think if you're thinking of a tight end as a pass catcher for your fantasy team, most of these players that went today are going to be better pass catchers than the receivers that went ahead of them. Like, I love Sam Laporta's landing spot. Detroit needs to find a replacement for TJ Hawkinson after making that trade last year. And Laporta, he played for Iowa. That Iowa offense was garbage last year, straight garbage. And he was the only weapon they had. And yet he still put up big numbers, even though defenses knew the ball was going to him time after time after time. So I think he should be a priority in rookie drafts. Similar thing with Luke Musgrave. He missed a lot of time for injury, but when he was on the field, he was a dominant force in the pass game. So I have these tight ends pretty high in my rankings, and I will be looking to take them as I can get them value-wise, because as other people decide that they don't want the tight end spot.
Yeah, Emerson, I'm going to have you keep going on the tight ends. You landed Laporta and Washington, so you kind of ended both of their fallings. Are those your favorite two in the draft? Do you like Kincaid in his first-round draft capital? I guess just what's your overall take on the tight ends?
In general, tight end has always been a position that it's really hard to translate to fantasy relevancy. We see how NFL teams value these tight ends, but there's a lot more that goes into it, the blocking, and that doesn't go into fantasy necessarily. So, we've seen first round tight ends, early second round tight ends fail a lot in the past. So in general, I usually fade tight ends and see, just because also there's a lot to learn. The route running, the blocking, they start off slow. And I think there's always there's a buy low opportunity for almost every, big, highly drafted tight end, whether it be, TJ Hawkinson, who's been consistent. There's been a lot of these guys are always a buyer low point, not in rookie draft. So that's what I like to do. Or, my original strategy in this was going to be to wait and see which tight ends maybe fell to me in the late second. With how disappointing this class has turned out, I don't mind being aggressive at tight end and Kincaid at the 12th spot, Michael Mayer at 14. In the pre-draft, I felt like I was going to maybe wait for them until the back end of the second round. However, there's just not a lot to get excited about. I'm absolutely fine taking the early drafted tight ends there. Sam Laporta is somebody I actually would have taken a little bit earlier. I was a big fan of him in the pre-draft. He was my tight end 3. And he's an outstanding, has had outstanding production in Iowa, high target share, great at the contested catch point, breaks tackles. The one criticism of Laporta, he's a little bit smaller. We've seen the tweener tight ends have been inconsistent for fantasy purposes, the Evan Ingrams and things like that. But Darnell Washington, I ended the slide, he's an intriguing guy. I mainly picked him because, I think somebody, he's a guy who, if he gets a positive practice report, he's a guy, people are like, oh my God, you look at the size and all the athletic measurables and everything. So he's not someone I'm overly excited about as a prospect, though. I think his athleticism is a little bit overstated. He runs in a straight line very quickly. He had a really fast shuttle time too, but when you watch the tape, he's not very fluid. He kind of moves like an older Gronkowski, a little bit robotic, a little bit tough in the movements, it looks like. So he's in playing behind Pat Freiermuth. It's just, he's not somebody I see making an impact anytime soon. Maybe a second contract type guy. You could have upside far down the line, but I wouldn't anticipate. Players are you never hold on to players for like that for 3, 4, 5 years, and I wouldn't anticipate that. So but in the 4th round of rookie drafts, that's fine by me. And like I said, there's a lot to like. Musgrave is another exciting guy. Kraft's an exciting guy. Obviously. Kuntz didn't go.
7th round, I think.
Yeah.
It was insane.
So he was a guy who I thought was a very exciting prospect who didn't end up getting.
And then ends up with the Jets, where he's kind of buried too. So that was a shocking one to me.
Yeah, I had him as my tight end 6 actually before the draft. So obviously I'm going to be changing that up.
I want to get into what we talked about, how we're going to talk about the last round. There's a player I want you guys to kind of just talk about, because this is all about, priority waivers. And one of the very first undrafted free agents to sign was Sean Tucker. Sean Tucker was a guy who I saw some draft analysts really liked Sean Tucker, but then he had the heart issue pop up at the combine. He goes undrafted, but then signs in Tampa Bay where they could kind of use a running back. So it's been a roller coaster for Sean Tucker. I'm just going to ask you guys both the very simple question. Are there too many red flags, especially now with being undrafted, with Sean Tucker, that he is not even someone you're considering? Emerson, you went with a Dwayne Washington over him. Is Sean Tucker off of your draft boards, or is he somebody, when we get into like these 5th round and waiver priorities, is he someone who you're maybe not drafting, but you wouldn't mind adding to your taxi squad after the draft, Emerson?
Yeah, I mean, he's someone who, exactly. It's hard, you can poke a lot of holes in his prospect profile, but in the 4th or 5th round, you can poke a lot of holes in anybody's prospect profile. Very good at Syracuse, good vision, had some pass catching chops, is a great, is a very good athlete actually too. So, there's a lot of raw tools, obviously the draft capital is less than ideal, I think Rachaad White's going to be the man in that backfield this year. But Sean Tucker, obviously, we saw, he was a guy who we were hyping up last year as a potential first-round pick in these rookie drafts. Big fall for him. So, yeah, somebody who I don't mind adding in the 4th, 5th round, waiver priority.
Same question, Austin. Are you avoiding him, or is there a point in the draft where he's worth the gamble?
I think like if you're at the end of the draft and there's no one else on the board, you're like, sure, why not take the dart throw? But I'm probably not drafting him. I'm probably prioritizing just taking as many dart throws as I can with this tight end class. And so I would prefer him as a waiver wire priority. And even then, like, it is very uncommon for UDFAs to really pop in fantasy and pop in the NFL. So, if you have the space on your roster to take that dart throw, sure, why not? Might as well. But I'm not putting in extra effort or using a lot of fab to go after that.
Perfect. All right, let's talk about what I like to talk about, and that's the end of draft waivers. If you are someone like me who trades away all of their rookie picks all of the time, end of draft waivers end up being a very important thing for you. And so with this draft, a typical rookie draft, I guess you're looking at 36 to 48 picks, depending on the size of your league and how many rounds. We went 60 picks in this draft. So I think looking at the very last round as guys who are probably going to be available in waivers, Emerson, who would you be targeting, one or two guys from this very last round? Obviously, you drafted one of them, but who would you be targeting as the guys in priority waivers that these would be the guys you would drop some fab on after the draft to get them just on your taxi squad?
Yeah, who I took, Trey Palmer. There's a lot to like. He's very exciting. He's a very exciting athlete, very fast. This is a guy who I thought could end up going and sneaking into late day two draft capital. So, I really like it. And, the landing spot's pretty good too. So, that's somebody who I was targeting in the pre-draft process, who I would be willing to, probably, put a little small fab bid on as well, or something like that. Yeah. As far as another guy, Puka Nacua is another guy that I really, very, very talented. We saw he was an off-season guy, the guy who we thought maybe could go in day two, but I when I was watching the film, there's a lot to like on film. It was impressive. I believe. But didn't he have the Senior Bowl where wasn't he the guy who left the Senior Bowl because was that him? Yeah, there was a wide receiver that left the Senior Bowl because they were getting positive. I believe that was Puka Nacua. He was very good at the Senior Bowl regardless. So he's one of my, like I said, that was another guy who I thought maybe could sneak into round 3, 4, 5 range. But so that's somebody who. Those are two wide receiver prospects who I thought maybe could be sneaky guys who I'm absolutely fine taking in round 5 on waiver wires.
I love that you brought him up because he went to a Rams offense that is really devoid of talent right now, especially at least in depth. They just don't have a lot of, he could see the field early, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. Austin, same question.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you're going to hear me harp on the tight ends a lot throughout this entire process because I love this tight end class. And you were talking about day 2, day 3 picks at tight end, like Travis Kelce is a 3rd round pick. Yeah. Rob Gronkowski, a 2nd round pick. Mark Andrews, a 3rd round pick. Jimmy Graham, a 3rd round pick. There's a lot of precedent for elite tight ends popping in the second after being drafted in the 2nd and 3rd round. So there's a couple of tight ends that weren't drafted today that I'm interested in. Cameron Latu from Alabama. He was drafted by San Francisco. Yeah. So that's a fun landing spot. If they want to use George Kittle as being the primary blocker, also just learning from George Kittle, that is an exciting possibility. Payne Durham going to Tampa Bay, that landing spot for him as they're rebuilding. He could be kind of a centerpiece of that offense. I would second the Trey Palmer pick that Emerson said. I love Trey Palmer. Also, though, A.T. Perry is really intriguing.
I was hoping one of you guys were going to bring him up. I love A.T. Perry. I hate the landing spot, but I love A.T. Perry.
I actually love the landing spot. Really? Quarterback situation, not great. But their starting wide receiver room right now, according to ESPN, is Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, and Rashid Shaheed. Is Michael Thomas playing still?
According to the Saints. That's a good point. If Thomas isn't there, I like the landing spot a lot better, but I just don't know what's going on at that point. So.
And then Rashid Shaheed, he was fine last year, but I think that outside of Chris Olave, this wide receiver room is pretty wide open. So A.T. Perry actually has a chance to move into a prominent role if he pops during camp. So I definitely would be trying to take him ahead of guys like Demario Davis, and maybe even Tank Dell, who have more competition for snaps. And then the last person I would say is a quarterback, Jake Haener. This is like you need a backup in case somebody gets injured. I like where Jake Haener has landed because
with New Orleans buying Carr.
Yeah, and so I think he's a similar style quarterback as Derek Carr. So if Derek Carr gets hurt, I think Jake Haener has an interesting possibility to be like a streaming option in redraft. Well, no, not in redraft leagues. Maybe in Superflex leagues.
Certainly not redraft.
But and so I like having him just on my roster, but I'm not breaking the fab budget to get him.
All right, guys, that's the end of the draft. I hope you guys took a lot from this. The oops of the draft is by far the mismanagement of CJ Stroud. Jahmyr Gibbs, you can make a small argument in Superflex over Stroud, but I don't even think that was a great pick by S. Perez. Our buddy Burns is actually going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. Actually, I think next week. So maybe we'll give him a little bit of a hard time about that. But we have Quentin Johnston going ahead of CJ Stroud, and I just don't think that's a great pick at all. I think that's definitely the oops of the draft, and we'll talk to Burns about that next week. Before we get out of here, Emerson, again, remind people what you're working on, where they can find your work.
Yeah, I'll be doing a lot of post draft rankings, mocks, all post draft analysis and rookies, with TWSN, Face Off Sports Network, Roto Underworld, Sports Gambling Podcast Network. So that's where you can find me. Feel free to, Dynasty_analyst on Twitter. I'll post all of that stuff there. Reddit, Facebook, all those good things too. So I appreciate you having me on, gentlemen. It was a great mock draft.
Perfect. And Austin, say your goodbyes.
Yeah, another fun draft in the books. You can find me on Twitter at Austin_FFL, and we'll catch you here next week.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one next week. As I mentioned, we are one thing that I wanted to do with this show was I wanted to have people who aren't necessarily analysts and on Twitter all the time talking fantasy football. And I reached out to some of the people who do these drafts with us, and Burns responded. So he is going to be on the show with us next week. And we're going to be doing another rookie draft because it's that time of year. So let's go ahead and get everything out of here. First and foremost, Dynasty After Party premiered last night. It was they were down a man this week. Michael Sicoli and Joel Worth were the only ones who were able to make the episode, but they talked about landing spots as well and even did a small mock draft. So it's just a taste of what you were going to get on this show. Every Wednesday live at 7 p.m. Eastern, we have No Punt Intended as our flagship show. It's going to be another landing spot show. Get used to it this week. All of your favorite shows are doing landing spots. They are going to have the wonderful Julia Pathworth on the show. I say they because I'm not going to be able to make it this week, but it's going to be a great show. That's Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Tomorrow night, we are going to have our Golf DFS show with Kelly and Adam. I believe Kelly's back this week, so they're going to be on there. Make sure you're checking that out. If you like Golf DFS, they have been just putting out killer picks every single week. And as Austin mentioned, we are back every Monday. It's another rookie draft next week. My big thing with this is I like to compare what happened before landing spots to after landing spots. So we are going to do a 1 QB draft next week. So same sort of scenario, same sort of questions. It's going to be a lot about landing spots. If you care about rookies for the next couple of weeks, this show is for you. And then we're going to be getting back into dynasty startups. So for Austin, for Emerson, thank you guys so much for joining us. Everybody who drafted with us, we appreciate you greatly. Thank you so very much. Always remember that defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We'll see you at next week's mock.